Good morning, metalheads of the internet, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Metal Meltdown. Today we are talking about the latest studio album from Code Orange, entitled The Above. That's right, guys, gals, and non-binary pals. Code Orange, one of my favorite modern metal bands, is back with their first album in nearly 3.5 years, their fifth full-length studio album overall. I've been following these guys for just under a decade now. I remember listening to I Am King when it came out back in 2014 and still being like a pissy, edgy 19-year-old like metal elitist who only listened to like thrash and death metal and being like blown away by how dark and moody and punishing and jagged and unpredictable that album was. It kind of helped to change my entire mind on like the metalcore and hardcore subgenres. Since then, they've continued to grow and expand and become more and more successful, dropping Forever in 2017 and Underneath in 2020, which saw them bring in new influences from like more aggressive styles of metal and also like alternative metal and industrial metal, the latter of which became especially prominent on Underneath. They've also continued to expand in a lot of other ways. They kind of took advantage of like the COVID-19 pandemic and quarantine and released a bunch of like special live stream concert events and specials that like people watched at home. They also did like a live acoustic album inspired by like MTV Unplugged from back in the day. They also did a remix album, like a total techno EBM remix album of Underneath, released earlier this year. They've collaborated with JPEG Mafia, Injury Reserve, Corey Taylor, Full of Hell. These guys just work so fucking hard, and they're so innovative and so ambitious, and for that reason, The Above has been one of my most highly anticipated albums of 2023, if not the number one most highly anticipated album of the year for me. And as a longtime Code Orange fan, and as somebody who has listened to this album quite a few times and really spent time analyzing it and dissecting it, getting underneath its skin, I feel very comfortable saying that The Above is the band's most adventurous album to date, and it's also going to end up being their most divisive. This album is unlike anything Code Orange have done before. They're toning down some of the heavier metalcore influences. They're indulging more so in some of the industrial and alternative metal and rock influences, and they're also bringing in new vibes and new flavors from nu metal, trip hop, techno. There are dreamy, hypnotic vocal textures and patterns. There are weird, wailing, almost grungy guitars. There's also some more straightforward alternative rock and hard rock songcraft and songwriting here, and every once in a while, you do have some really pounding, brooding, menacing, like metallic hardcore still kind of like clawing its way out and showing its fangs. This isn't just Code Orange at the most confident and artistic either. This is also Code Orange at their most independent in a very long time. They are now signed to Blue Grape Music, which has only one other band in its roster right now, Spiritual Camp, and I don't even know who they are. The band has produced this record entirely by themselves, which means everything that you're hearing here is exactly what Code Orange intended. There was no outside interference from another producer or some executive or whatever the fuck. Now, I will say right off the bat, I do not think that this album is as cohesive as previous studio albums like Forever and Underneath, and obviously this not being as brutal, this not having the same manic energy as previous studio albums is also a bit of a bummer. But in general, overall, it's really hard not to admire and enjoy what Code Orange have done here. You have songs like Splinter the Soul and Snapshot, which indulge in fusions of like techno and electronica and industrial and like metalcore and post-hardcore. The former of which channels like static X energy and vibes in a way that feels fresh and new and fun, the latter of which feels like a long-lost collaboration between like Fatboy Slim and In Fear and Faith. Then there's The Mask of Sanity Slips and Take Shape, which are unabashedly and unapologetically full-blown 90s alt and nu metal nostalgia and worship, but in the best way possible. I like the eerie vocal textures, I like the stark, edgy grooves and that very muscular guitar tone and the pounding percussion. It's like if we threw Korn and Faith No More into a blender with just the tiniest dash of influence from the Smashing Pumpkins, especially on Take Shape, which actually does feature the Smashing Pumpkins' Billy Corgan on guest vocals. And then there's Mirror, which I honestly just love through and through. This is inarguably going to end up being the most controversial cut on the record, but it's my favorite. I just really love the sound and vibe here. It's like trip-hop meets alternative rock with a little bit of grunge. It's like a darker take on like very early Blind Melon with like a dash of Fiona Apple thrown into the mix. I love the dreamy, atmospheric, cascading synthesizers. I love the acoustic guitar. Reba Myers shines on lead vocals here. Her vocals simultaneously project an image of someone who is mournful and doing some introspection, but they're also quite timid. And you know, there is this kind of like bittersweet kind of like energy to the whole number. And the way that this track closes out and then transitions into the following number, A Drone Opting Out of the Hive, with trip-hop beats and, like, harpsichord, is honestly kind of, like, masterful, dare I say. And speaking of, A Drone Opting Out of the Hive, unquestionably one of the most unhinged cuts on the record. It definitely re-taps into that, like, industrial groove metal, metalcore energy of 2020s underneath, but it also has, like, this kind of, like, trap metal vibe that brings to mind Backwash or Ghostmane. I don't know, Robert, that sounds kind of dumb. That sounds like they sold out. First off, you're a dumbass. Second, if that really is truly what you think, and if you truly just want the classic Code Orange brutality, you're still gonna get that through numbers like The Game and Grooming My Replacement, which go unbelievably, stupidly fucking hard, with all kinds of, like, weird progressions and, like, jagged edges. Now, there are, unfortunately, a few duds on this record. In fact, the album even opens on one of its biggest and also one of its most confusing, Never Far Apart. There's an interesting idea here, but the transition from the verse to the chorus just is not very smooth or good at all. And honestly, I feel like this track just kind of like wastes time farting around on a variety of like different textures and influences. Like this feels like something that Code Orange kind of whipped together at the last minute as an intro number for this record. I'm also not a huge fan of Circle Through and But a Dream. These tracks were just flat out boring to me. Very straightforward, very unremarkable, very forgettable, like hard rock and alternative metal with a little bit of Code Orange spice, I suppose, I guess, but not enough to get me invested and excited. With these songs being near like the very, very end of the album too, it just kind of like brings this whole thing to a halt. Like all the momentum built up by so many of the tracks we've talked about, it just feels like it disappears completely with these two cuts. Thankfully though, the album does recover and end on a very strong note with its final number and its title track, The Above, which is also guaranteed to be a live staple. I wouldn't be shocked if they close out every concert with this fucking thing. I mean, the fucking massive drums, which just sounds like thunder and lightning coming down from Mount Olympus, and like those like moody alt metal, sludge metal progressions, and those amazing vocals from Jamie and Reba. It's a banger. I'm feeling a 4 out of 5 on this bad boy, maybe leaning slightly towards a 3.5 out of 5, but a 4 out of 5 nonetheless. I think Code Orange succeeded in most of the areas they wanted to succeed in on this album. It's incredibly well performed. It's mostly very well written, and very well produced as well. I mean, I do think production-wise it is a step down from Underneath, which was inevitable to a certain extent because that is one of the most perfectly produced albums ever. But this is still a really great sounding record. It feels very inviting and it feels very immersive, and all of the different influences and dynamics are given a lot of room to breathe within the album. This might be the first time in a while that a Code Orange album doesn't end up in my top 10 at the end of the year, but I still do think this is a great album, and I would still recommend this to anybody looking for something a little bit more adventurous from like mainstream modern metal. And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm not an expert, nor do I claim to be. So what do you think? Do you like this record? Do you not like this record? And what do you want to hear from me next? And thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe right here so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately. Look, there's other videos here. Hey, did you know we also have merch on Redbubble? You should check that out. You should put Chompy on your fucking body. You should put me on your fucking body. And as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.